Hello, and welcome back to Intro to American Studies, the summer session. And this is lecture 2 from week 2, where we're talking about the boarding school system and the effects that it has and has had and continues to have on Indigenous artists, authors, and scholars as they think about what it means to have a future, to fight for the future, and to conceptualize the future in its relationship to past and present. So let's get started. This image should look familiar to you if you did the reading for this week. But if not, you still have time because this class is asynchronous. Get it? Okay, that was a dumb joke. I'm sorry. All right, so this is a picture of Tom Torlino, who is a Diné man who was photographed while a student at the Carlisle Indian School. These photographs were taken as part of a propaganda campaign for the school. The caption might be a little bit hard to read. So it says Tom Torlino Navajo. Navajo is an exonym, which just means a name assigned from by outsiders to a group for the Diné. And the first picture was taken in 1882, and the second picture was taken in 1885, according to the caption. We don't know if that's actually the case because the basic argument here from this picture is kind of a lie in and of itself. Right, so let's think about what's going on in this picture. On the one hand, we've got a man in traditional clothing with long hair, and he is gazing kind of off out of the view of the camera, and he is photographed in a way to emphasize his skin having a darker color, probably through the lighting used. And then on the right, we have the same person, not wearing jewelry, not wearing earrings, wearing a Western style suit, and like a high collared button up shirt with what looks like a tie. And he's gazing still off the screen, but a little bit more centered. And he's got short hair in a cut that's very much like reasonable for the time period for a white guy, like would have that haircut. And very significantly, he's shot under different lighting, so he looks a lot whiter than he does on the left. This is very much part of the propaganda campaign, right? These are intentional choices meant to present this person as much more Western looking, thanks to the influence of the school, is the implication, right? And also the truth, right? Because that's what the school would do. It would change the way you dress and cut your hair forcibly. And so what they're trying to do is sort of visualize the civilizing, quote unquote, mission of the school, which is to kill the Indian and save the man, to paraphrase the founder of the school, Richard Henry Pratt. So why should this image look familiar to you? Because it is also the cover image for the other assigned reading for today, which is Rethinking the Apocalypse, an Indigenous Anti-Futurist Manifesto. And so here we have an edited version of this portrait of Tom Torlino, where it is... if I had to guess, I don't actually know how it was made, but if I had to guess based on how it looks, I would guess it is a digitally edited version of the photograph intended to look like it has been reprinted on top of itself 3 times, once in black and white grayscale, once in red and once in blue, with the implication of it doing a sort of 3D glasses kind of thing. I don't have a pair of 3D glasses. If I did, I would love to look at it under them and see if it actually does the 3D effect. But I haven't actually checked on that. It probably does. But that's certainly what they're going for here. And then it's also been edited such that the Westernified version of Tom Tolino is wearing this gas mask and goggles kind of set up. Now, if we were in our traditional classroom setting where we got to have a discussion, I would want to talk to you guys about why you think this choice was made, both as a choice for a cover image and specifically why the inclusion of the gas mask. Since we're not, I think it is because it is the visual version of the critique of the Western future that the article is making, right? Because the article is in its entirety an argument against a very particular kind of future. The future that we typically think of when we use the word future without any edits, like future tech, future society, future... when we imagine the future from our vantage point right now, because this piece is not that old, we might imagine a couple of possible scenarios, but a lot of them are going to involve worsened versions of the climate crisis that we're experiencing now, right? Worsened versions of this crisis of a lack of clean drinking water, safe food, and clean air to breathe. It's very plausible to imagine futures in which we have to wear gas masks like this, right? That's one possible outcome of a world of unchecked resource extraction and pollution. And that future is very much the future of a place like the Carlisle Industrial School, right? Future of Western industry, profit over the planet, and over maybe more traditional modes of living in harmony or in balance with the planet, such as Indigenous land stewardship models. You don't get a future where you wear this gas mask if you let people live the way Tom Torlino was probably living before he went to that school. The mode of existence and the future for which schools like Carlisle are designed sort of to bring about that future is the future that also not only develops technology like the gas mask, but necessitates it, is the argument here. Or to quote the authors of this text, which is, right, it's anonymously posted by Indigenous Action. So that's why I keep referring to the authors, because it's an anonymous, like, collaborative piece, or presumably collaborative piece. Anyway, to quote them, "We live in the future of a past that is not our own." Which raises some questions, right? Is this piece really against futurity in and of itself, or is it against a particular linear narrative of future progress, or the future of this past that is not our own? The authors critique a lot of the history we've been discussing this week. Again, quoting the authors here, "These are the gifts of infesting manifest destinies. This is that future imaginary our captors would have us perpetuate and be a part. The merciless imposition of this dead world was driven by an idealized utopia as charnel house. It was for our own good, an act of civilization. Killing the Indian, killing our past, and with it our future. Saving the man, imposing another past, and with it another future." These are the terms we've been using, right? Manifest destiny. The future imaginary, right? This is part of the reason I chose to use the future imaginary as like the sub-name for this class, is because we don't know what the future holds. It's imaginary to us. And in such, it is structured by the limits of our imagination. And one thing that being held in captivity does is shape and limit the possibilities that you can imagine for yourself. The merciless imposition of this dead world was driven by an idealized utopia as charnel house. It was for our own good, an act of civilization. Here we get again the dead world, the apocalypse, for our own good is white saviorism, and civilization as a term imposed from without, as the product of being molded by a colonial force. Then we get killing the Indian and saving the man as that's again, it's paraphrasing Richard Henry Pratt, the founder of Carlisle, and it's sort of the goal of the boarding schools, which is very much to kill off people's pasts, kill off the Indigenous past and its connection to the future and the present via destroying ties of language, family, community, history, and socialization. And then when it comes to this line about mercilessness, that comes from a very famous quote from Thomas Jefferson, where he refers to Indigenous people as, and I'm quoting here, merciless Indian savages. When we're quoting phrases like this, I guess this is not strictly part of the pedagogy of the class, but it is an important piece of pedagogy. Is terms like this should always be in scare quotes. In this case, we are quoting a literal thing a man said, Thomas Jefferson, and what he said. But like, I'm a white person, right? These are not words that I can use to describe a group of people of which I am not a part. If I were to say, as I'm doing right now, give a lecture about this, I'm putting it in quotes for a reason. If this were a slur, I would not be saying it. And that's policy for this classroom. So don't put slurs in your writing that you turn into me, please and thank you. And if you're going to quote something like Thomas Jefferson referring to Indigenous people in this very offensive, caricaturish way, then put it in scare quotes, even if you're paraphrasing rather than directly quoting. But in this case, it's a direct quote, so it would obviously have quotes either way. Anyway, returning to the pedagogy of directly what we're talking about, much like how Lauren Olamino reflects and inverts these the racism white savior trope, the authors of this manifesto are here inverting the language of rescue and saving and mercilessness to portray the brutality of colonization and the ongoing harm that it continues to impose on people in the present. So here are some other quotes from the reading for today. This one's really important because it gets at other futures, namely through some very significant prophecies from a variety of different Indigenous communities. So, quoting from the manifesto, our ancestors dreamt against the end of the world. Many worlds have gone before this one. Our traditional histories are tightly woven with the fabric of the birthing and ending of worlds. Through these cataclysms, we have gained many lessons that have shaped who we are and how we are to be with one another. Our ways of being are informed through finding harmony through and from the destruction of worlds, the elliptic birth, death, rebirth. We have an unknowing of histories upon histories of the world that is part of us. It is the language of the cosmos. It speaks in prophecies long carved in the scars where our ancestors dreamed. It is the ghost dance, the seven fires, the birth of the white buffalo, the seventh generation. It is the five suns. It is written in stone near Oribe and beyond. These prophecies are not just predictive, they've also been diagnostic and instructive. So there's a lot going on here, right? Just starting from the bottom, these prophecies are not just predictive, they've also been diagnostic and instructive. That's kind of that's the core of the importance of talking about and imagining futures, right? Is not just to predict what happens, but also to diagnose what is currently happening and what has been happening, and to teach us something about how we can and should proceed. But yeah, here the authors are proposing dreaming this forward-looking act as being against the end of the world. Because when you're dreaming, you're not saying, yeah, it's over, I give up, right? You're dreaming something into the forward. You're imagining more possibilities, more ways of going about things, rather than admitting defeat, right? It's not about winning or losing the single end of a single world. It's about continuing against the end of one world into new worlds, into old worlds, acknowledging the fact that there have been many worlds before and there will be many worlds after. This harmony of destruction and rebirth, right? It is a non-linear, intricately woven way of engaging with time and what it means to survive an apocalypse. And in writing and dreaming against the end of the world, the authors are also arguing against the predictable future of rote narrative that begins with colonial contact, right? Contact, quote unquote, civilizing process, slash apocalypse, and then colonial future. They're writing against this very simple narrative. And instead of dreaming of a future of Western civilization, boarding schools, assimilation, or erasure, the author's ancestors dreamed otherwise, and the authors continue that dream. Not just of other futures, as in the future that would have gone with the past that was disrupted when colonialism arrived in America, but also other understandings of what it means to have a future in and of itself, other ways of being in relation to time. We talked a little bit about this last week, but we didn't have time to go into it then, but we're going into it a bit now, which is Indigenous concepts of time. The authors of this manifesto contest the predictable timelines of Western narrative structure. So on page 2, they write, from religious tomes to fictionalized scientific entertainment, each imagined timeline constructed so predictably, beginning, middle, and ultimately the end. Instead of this, right, this whole piece is kind of a critique of that model. Instead of beginning, middle, end, and this linear structure that we see from the progress narrative to like mainstream conceptions of history in the West, the authors are gesturing towards other concepts of time. Prophetic time, for instance. These prophecies that are, as they put it, written in the scars of the ancestors' dreams. These are prophecies told and written in the past, projecting possible futures, but also teaching about the present, and also kind of echoed through, like a lot of these prophecies have to do with different eras of change, ending, new beginnings. They're points where future, past, and present all coexist, both because the prophecy contains the narrative of the past person who prophesized, the present where we're engaging with the story, and the future that is being prophesized, but also because a lot of these narratives kind of like have multiple points at which they happen. So various prophecies are referenced in this article. Some of them include the 7 fires, which is an Anishinaabe prophecy of 7 periods of time. And just caveat, I'm not an expert on any of these prophecies, and I'm also not going to try and delve into them too much because it's not my business as an outsider. I will give the basics because that's like, I'll give the basics of what I know. And what is not like very closed religiously. But because I'm not in any of these communities and this is not my like tradition, I'm not going to like go into details about things that I don't understand rightfully, and that aren't my business to share with anyone. So what I say is things that are like commonly known and told about these prophecies, not the details of like anything secret. Okay. Yeah, so the 7 fires. This is an Anishinaabe prophecy of 7 periods of time that is that each of which is prefaced by significant changes. The 4th fire and the 7th fire are particularly significant branch points, the 4th being the one that represents colonial contact. And if you want to read the 7 fires prophecy, I linked a source in the sources. The ghost dance is part prophecy, part movement. It began in 1860 with a Paiute prophet called Wadziwab, and then it was revived 29 years later by another Paiute prophet named Wovoka, and it involved doing a dance that was a ceremony to bring back the dead and chase away settlers. The prophecy proclaimed that the dead would rise, the buffalo would return, and white people would leave. And this spread like wildfire, very popular religious movement of ghost dancers, and that people would wear specific shirts to do the dance, and the shirts were supposed to repel bullets, and settlers were very terrified of this. They took it as a threat, and ultimately this led in part, settler fear of the ghost dance led in part to the Wounded Knee Massacre, which was the mass killing of those dancers and a lot of women and children, and including babies, at Wounded Knee. And that's a class in and of itself. White buffalo calf is a reference to a Lakota prophecy that portends great change, specifically the return of white buffalo calf woman, Tesanwi, who is like a very, very important figure in Lakota cosmology. And so every time a white buffalo calf is born, it's like a very significant sign. The Five Sons prophecy is a Mexica story about the 5 eras of humanity, each of which is ruled by a different god. The 7th generation refers to the Oglala Lakota elder Black Elk's vision of the 7th generation after a period of darkness and starvation. Struck would fight for the future and then change the world. There's also like a lot of Indigenous communities for whom thinking about 7 generations in the past and in the future is like a way of living in a good way, because you're living with respect to your ancestors and also with respect to the generations to come. And then Stone near Oribe is referring to Hopi petroglyphs in what we call Arizona today, some of which are on a specific rock called Prophecy Rock. And Hopi religion is kept very close, so I can't really say anything else about this because it's very closed. But lots of these prophecies have to do with change, endings, and beginnings. And then, Indigenous concepts of time. There's a lot of different concepts of time out there, because even just in what is contemporary US, even just in the contemporary US, there are 574 federally recognized tribes and nations, and that's not counting all of the ones that are not recognized. And that's, again, just the land that is considered part of the contemporary US. There are Indigenous people all over the world. So there are thousands of different Indigenous ideas of time and temporality. So this is just barely scratching the surface, right? So quoting from this manifesto again, "We are the dreamers dreamt by our ancestors. We have traversed all time between the breaths of our dreams. We exist at once with our ancestors and unbirthed generations. Our future is held in our hands. It is our mutuality and interdependence. It is our relative. It is in the creases of our memories, folded gently by our ancestors. It is our collective dream time, and it is now, then, tomorrow, yesterday. The anti-colonial imagination isn't a subjective reaction to colonial futurisms. It is anti-settler future. Our life cycles are not linear. Our future exists without time. It is a dream uncolonized. This is the Indigenous anti-future." So this is kind of the thesis of the piece, right? And the key concepts here are nonlinear time, time that is held all at once between the breaths of our dreams, a future without time, dream time, and this idea of like past, present, and future all being deeply connected. So we exist at once with our ancestors and unbirthed generations. That's getting at this concept of like thinking 7 generations in the past and 7 generations in the future. This idea that history and the future are deeply interconnected will come up quite a lot in our readings. Later in this course, we're going to read us an excerpt from a book called Our History is the Future, which is an excellent read that I highly recommend. I highly recommend you read the rest of it, because you could read it in a day. It's very readable and it's very interesting, and it talks quite a lot about Lakota cosmology. But it also talks a lot about the relationship between past and future and present in the context of talking about the resistance against the DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline. Anyway, another thing this paragraph gets at is the way in which the future is not just this thing that we imagine that is something we work to enact now so that it happens later. It's not this linear timescale thing, but it is something that is very caught up in people's ways of living, mutuality and interdependence. It is a relative. It's something that is very dependent on the past and the present, but also something that is like mutually engaged with the present, right? It's not a the present shapes the future. It's a both shaping each other, all of these things shaping each other kind of thing. In a very similar way to how Lauren talks about change in Parable of the Sower, right? As something that can be shaped, but also shaped. So dream time is a significant term here. This is a very loose translation of a Walpuri word, Jukurpa, which is a word for a lot of things: creation stories, the relationships between all beings, moral teachings and stories, the land itself. Jakarpa is a creation story, but it's not set in or limited to the past. Instead, it encompasses all time at once, past, present, and future. And it's literally mapped. Comes from Aboriginal Australian worldviews, which is where the Walpuri are from. And it's literally mapped onto the land of Australia via something called songlines, which are songs that describe the stories of land and also the land features like the water, people, mountains, rocks, and paths that people can take through that land. And what's really interesting about these is they will exist across the entire continent, changing language as you sing from one place to another. But the song itself and the structure of the song describes things even if you don't understand the language that you're singing in. Like the music of it also gets the point. Very fascinating thing that I am not an expert in. If you want to learn more about it, I highly recommend you look into it. And then, there's no one unified Indigenous attitude towards time, but different orientations from different worldviews. Ojibwe Mdewikanton, I tried to pronounce that correctly. I'm so sorry that I didn't. But Ojibwe Mdewikanton, Dakota scholar Scott Richard Lyons, has a book that, the book is about treaties and the history of treaties and signing treaties and like how the decision to sign or not to sign when you're constrained and even forced is like this weird place where like by marking a piece of paper you're exerting some amount of sovereignty, but also like your sovereignty is being taken. It's a really interesting book and very nuanced, and I highly recommend you read it if you're interested in Indigenous history and treaty politics. But the intro talks a lot about different perspectives on time and place. And one thing that Lyons does is he argues against this cliche stereotype that like Western time is linear and Native time is simply circular. Because there is this idea of cyclical time that gets mentioned, right? Our life cycles are not linear in texts like this. And like, if you think about a medicine wheel, for some cultures, a medicine wheel represents the life cycle in a lot of ways, but it's not that simple. And so Lyons is arguing for temporal complexity and multiplicity in particular. He frames time as something that, and I'm quoting here, tends to move like a people migrating home, in fits and starts with false beginnings and many fulfilled endings, always looking to both past and future, always producing diversity, a history of temporal multiplicity. So time has cyclical elements and is cyclical in some contexts for some people, but it's not as simple as it's either a line or a circle. It's more complicated than that. And then Mark Rifkin, who does have a book that is really just about like concepts of time called Beyond Settler Time, argues that not only are Indigenous modes of being in time distinct and situated in place, perspective, and community in ways that like Western time of like space, time, and physics is like not. Such modes of time are really not translatable. And he asks the question, how might an implicit imperative to become temporally intelligible to non-natives limit possibilities for envisioning other Indigenous experiences of time and expressions of temporal sovereignty? In other words, Indigenous ways of being in time are very grounded in particular worldviews, particular places, and particular relationships. That's not something that you can easily translate into another language, let alone for somebody from a completely different culture, worldview, perspective. In the act of trying to translate that, do you strip away so much of it that it loses itself and with it your sovereignty of living in this way of relating to time by making yourself legible to outsiders? Or are you also sort of like subjecting yourself to outsider modes of being in time? And the Anti-Futurist Manifesto, in its argument, answers this question with a yes, saying that the predictable mode of linear time that we often use as a like universal reference, right? Like the timetable, the time of calendars and schedule books is a mechanism of control. And being against the futures that such a model makes possible opens up other possibilities, like Indigenous futurisms. So many Indigenous artists and writers create futurist works that present futures that are not limited by the colonial present. A couple of examples. We've talked a lot about literature and theory, so I wanted to give some visual art examples, including Skawennati, who's a Kanyankahaka artist, Cara Romero, who's Chemehuevi, and Virgil Ortiz, who's Cochiti. Skawennati creates machinimas, which are machine animations, in Second Life, the video game, that tell Haudenosaunee creation stories and also like stories about futuristic and spiritual communications between Sky World, which is the ancestral world in the sky, and then Turtle Island, which is here, and feature things like the Three Sisters as like these superheroine figures. She does all kinds of other work with like time travel glasses and dolls and like creating digital territory that people can engage with. And her work is really cool. And I wish I could show you her videos because they're amazing, but we're running a whole semester in 6 weeks. So Abtech Island is her virtual gallery / gathering space. It stands for Aboriginal Territories in Cyberspace. I think the C might be supposed to be capitalized. Whoops. And it's a Second Life location that people can go to engage with art and each other. And it's very interesting stuff. She also does work that kind of like transcends the digital physical boundary. I'm going to pull one up in a minute. I forgot to do my usual thing where I have it loitering in a window behind the window, so I apologize for that. But yeah, here's some of her work. This is a project called They Sustain Us, which is about the Three Sisters. In case you don't know, the Three Sisters are 3 crops that are indigenous to the Americas: corn, beans, and squash. Which grow together very well. And they do a great job of like shading each other, providing support for each other, and preventing pests for each other so they can grow together in like these cooperative gardens very, very effectively. And they are very good at providing sustenance for people, for other life forms. And so the Kanien'kehá:ka word for the Three Sisters is, I'm not going to pronounce this right, I'm so sorry, Tionhekwen. Which translates to "they sustain us," though in English you'd say "the sustainers." And this is quoting from Skawennati, from the webpage for this project. I wanted to depict Onessa corn, Osaheta beans, and Ononsera squash as protective agent. Onosera, sorry, as proactive agents throughout history who have resisted war, colonization, corporate greed, and insecticide. These challenges led the girls to conclude that in today's society, the Three Sisters would make their greatest impact as superheroes. So she presents them as these superheroes with these like uniforms and these like action sequences, and she's made music videos for them. She's done fashion shows of them. And that's what I wanted to show you. Can I get the computer to work? Let's find out. Oh no, I am doing a song. Let's reopen our little. Okay, bear with me while I'm bad at technology for a minute. Bear with me, bear with me. Perfect, we did it. Okay, let's make this computer window go to the thing that we wanted to. And close enough. Okay, so yeah, this is Skawennati's website. And we're really just going to scroll down until we find the thing I'm looking for, which is the real life fashion show that she did. All of this. Where is it? Oh no. Here we go. The real life fashion show that she did, featuring models playing the parts of the Three Sisters, the sustainers, in these in an assortment of outfits that she designed for them. So these models are dressed as corn. These ones are, this is somebody representing beans. Here we have corn again. You can tell by the color schemes. Here, and also these symbols. This is beans. This is squash. Yeah, they're just really cool. Um, and then here are all of the models together, sort of representing different takes on each of the sisters. And so yeah, this was a world premiere of a fashion art show. Um, it's just a really cool project that I'm a big fan of. If you couldn't tell. Which of these is the right? No, we don't need all of them. There we go. Okay. Back to our regularly scheduled slideshow. Um, oh no. Hello? 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 Okay, yes. All right. She also presents these really cool retellings of creation stories. Uh including She Falls for Ages is a sci-fi retelling, and this is quoting from Skawennati's description of her own work. She Falls for Ages is a sci-fi retelling of the Haudenosaunee creation story. It begins on an ancient alien world populated by a technologically sophisticated people whose culture centers on the care and reverence for the beautiful, energy-producing celestial tree. The central figure of the tale is Otsitskayon, also known as Sky Woman. She and the guardian of the celestial tree fall in love, but soon learn that their world is dying. Otsitskayon bravely steps into the void and into a new role as astronaut and world builder. I quote a lot of block quotes like this from artists describing their own work, and in general, because it's really important for a class like this, and in general, to let Indigenous voices speak for themselves, right? I'm just here to facilitate discussion of their work and also to provide context of these different ideas of what it means to think about the future in the context of the American hemisphere and of Turtle Island or North America specifically. So, She Falls for Ages is beautiful. I highly recommend you watch it. It's not that long. It's gorgeously animated. Here is a machinimograph, which is a machinima photograph of becoming Sky Woman, is what it's called, and it features Otsitskayon next to the celestial tree in Skyworld. So she sort of jumps from Skyworld down to try and carry on life for the people of Skyworld, and ultimately she lands in the ocean, where she is found by a turtle, and the turtle lets her climb onto its back, and this becomes Turtle Island, and various animals come and help, and she plants a seed and mud from the ocean floor, and it becomes like life. Anyway, yeah, the Haudenosaunee creation story. Um, and yeah, she also made a response video a couple years later called Greetings from Skyworld, which imagines a world where Skyworld was actually saved from death and destruction. And so the ancestors look down onto Turtle Island and they send greetings and care. And this is really cool because it is a speculative futurist work of this really cool machinima technology that's only really become possible in the last couple of decades, telling a story that is from the ancient past, right? It's a creation story, but it's also telling a story of a world that to us is highly futuristic. And so it really does speak to the ways in which past and future intertwine. So moving on to Cara Romero's work. I'm a big fan of Cara Romero's work too. A lot of your teachers will sometimes just show you, when it comes to showing art in the classroom, a lot of the times it's either really historically significant art or it's art that we just really like. For writings, it's a little different, but I just really like these contemporary artists. So Cara Romero does a wide variety of photographs, and her work is primarily focused on highlighting Indigenous presence, life, and diversity, that Native cultures are not stuck in the past, not romanticized, and not dead or a casualty of colonialism. They're not static, they're very diverse and very vibrant. And so her current exhibition, Panupunu Rugai, which means living light, is in Arizona right now. I think it's in Phoenix, Arizona, at the art museum there, and it features a bunch of art, including this photograph, Coyote Girl. Coyote is this trickster figure for a lot of Indigenous nations, and here we see her in a spaceship with a little ray gun, and just it's very cool, right? It's a very cool piece of like futuristic work that connects like things that we don't typically associate with the natural world or traditional tales with those elements in a really seamless and interesting way. Here's another one. I could have picked a bunch. This exhibit is full of futuristic works. This one's called Devil's Claw #1, and it's from just last year. And here's some pictures for context of Devil's Claw, which is like an ethnobotanically useful plant for a lot of communities in the desert. It's a desert plant that grows across the Southwest. There's a bunch of different species of it, and it produces these claw-like seed pods that can be used for food and also for making baskets and things like that. And I just love how this is done in such a way that the human form mimics the plant form. It's just really cool. And then Virgil Ortiz is much more of like a traditional sci-fi artist, if we want to go there, because he's kind of world built an entire universe that connects all of his, or quite a lot of his artwork. Maybe not literally every piece of his artwork, but quite a lot of them. So he's a multimedia 3D artist who does pottery, sculpture, photography, live action, video installations, and all kinds of things. And he combines traditional Pueblo pottery techniques and aesthetics with futurist sci-fi elements to create works that engage with this history of the 1680 Pueblo revolt, and imagine what it would look like for that revolt to reoccur in the future. And he also makes a lot of work that speaks critically about contemporary politics and ecological themes. So some context on 1680, because I realized that this is not a thing that gets talked about a lot in history classes, especially not if you're not in New Mexico. So my family lives in New Mexico, which is part of the reason I know about this. The other reason is that I study this, but I kind of grew up having at least a little bit of knowledge about this because I grew up in a region where this is talked about. So in 1680, the Southwest was already kind of being settled by Spanish colonists, right? New Mexico has a 400 plus year history of colonization, and in 1680, a lot of the Pueblos were very literally enslaved by the conquistadors. And they were tired of being enslaved. They were tired of living under very brutal regimes that would cut people's hands off for trying to escape, among other things. And a leader named Pope from Okewinke, which is one of the Pueblos, he decided that he'd had enough and that people had had enough. And he sent 2 runners from Tezuki Pueblo, Omtua and Katua, to spread the word that he was planning a revolt and the details of the plan to the other Pueblos. And the other Pueblos were like, yeah, absolutely. We also want to revolt. We are also tired of being enslaved, exploited, and brutalized. And so what they did was they had knotted pieces of string, which you can kind of see in this image of a wheat paste that I saw back in 2025 while walking around town while I was visiting family. And I included it here because it includes the knotted cord, which is how they timed the revolt. Because these pueblos are like miles and miles away from each other, and people are like very much locked down and not really able to like freely travel or freely communicate. So the way they kept the plan secret was by using a knotted cord as a communication method. Every day you untie one knot, and when you get to the last knot, that's how you know that it's time to strike. And so a bunch of pueblos revolted. It's more complicated than that, but in short, a bunch of pueblos revolted, and the revolt was very successful. Very successful. They retook the homelands. They kicked out the Spanish occupation. They retook Santa Fe, which contemporary Santa Fe is built on a place called Ogapogewinge, which was like a mutual gathering space for a lot of the local pueblos, and they burnt down a lot of the colonial buildings. And they held the homelands for 12 years before the Spanish recolonized the area. So this is a really significant moment in Pueblo history and in Southwest regional history. And what Virgil Ortiz does, and he's from Cochiti, which is one of the pueblos that participated in this revolt, is he reimagines 1680 in conversation with a future Pueblo revolt that happens in 2180. And he's been working on this project for 20 years at this point. I'm not exaggerating, 20 years. And he makes a variety of sculptural installations and pottery and these costumes and designs of like future times. And he gets people to play the roles of these future people who enact the Pueblo Revolt Part 2, basically. And so he's written a whole story behind it. And so here are some excerpts. This is a bust that he made of Popeye, and another bust of Popeye, and a person meant to represent Popeye, time traveler. So here we have late summer of the Castilian year 1680, and I'm reading from the captions. Popeye has called his allies from the Pueblos to converge in Taos, which is one of the Pueblos, for a secret meeting. Their purpose to rise up against the oppressive Castilian invaders. So this is the history of the 1680 revolt. Little do the delegates know that their descendants in 2180 are facing a similar threat and have heard Popeye call for aid. Tahu, along with her blind archers and their recon watchmen, have traveled back in time to assist in the uprising, pledging their aid in delivering ceramic armor and weaponry. So, and then here we get backed by the recon watchmen, who are these like guard figures that are portrayed here on the left. Popeye and the delegates devise a secret plan to rise up as one on the same day, entrusting the secret with two young runners, Omtua and Katua, and their counterparts from 2180. And so these figures represent, I think, futurism, Omtua and Katua. Yeah, this is a 20-year going project, and it's really complicated. There's a lot of lore, some of which comes from like history, right? Like Omtua, Katua, Popeye are real figures. And then some of them, like Tahu and the Blind Archers and the Recon Watchmen, are these future figures that Ortiz is writing the story of in real time. And he's been doing this in like various gallery and museum installations all over for years. There's one going on in the Santa Fe Art Museum right now. There was another one a couple of years ago. And he does a lot of collaborations with other artists and actors, and has apparently been in talks with like various comic book and superhero companies about like potentially pursuing that kind of route with the story, which I think would be really cool. Anyway, if you're interested in this kind of thing, I highly recommend checking out his website. And yeah, that's just like an intro to some contemporary Indigenous futurist visual art and multimedia art. And if you are more of the short story type of person, don't worry. We will be reading some stories from a collection called, we'll be reading one story from a collection called Love Beyond Body, Space, and Time, which is a queer and two-spirit Indigenous speculative fiction collection. And then also Walking the Clouds is like a great one to read if that's something that you're into. Highly recommend. Another really good one is This Place 150 Years Retold, which I had sitting on my desk, so I'm pulling it up. What? Actually, I have Virgil Ortiz gallery book here too. So here's some context about how big these busts are. Anyway, this seems like a history book, and it's mostly comics that are telling history of Indigenous people of Canada, so Métis, First Nations, and Inuit people. But the last story is a story set in the year 2350, and it's about time travel, and it's really cool. Anyway, part of the fun of a class on futurism is that we get to talk about the future. And after so much heavy material, I wanted to end on a lighter note. Thank you for coming to the second week of class. Keep doing your weekly reading reflections, and let me know if you have any questions. You've got my email. Come to office hours if you want to chat, and have a great rest of the day, or night, or weekend, or whenever it is for you. Bye.